It's straight talk with no chaser. It gives the people a voice, empowers you with a choice. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. She provides a platform of growth and gives a dying people hope. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser.
Welcome to a special edition of the Straight No Chaser Show on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio station. Thank you so much for tuning in today, as I'm so glad to be with you this rainy evening in Chicago. The guest I had initially anticipated, due to circumstances happening in the Chicagoland area with the Laquan McDonald murder and the fallout, was unable to be with us tonight. So I'm going to just speak on some facts in regards to what has happened in Chicago in the past week and just really put some things out there, hopefully on your minds. Number one, you have a 17-year-old who was a ward of the state, allegedly walking at night, allegedly doing some damage to some vehicles. You had other officers already on the scene when Jason, are we just going to call him Jason the murderer, rolled up and literally, it appears from the dash cam, chased him down and shot him 16 times in 15 seconds and ended the young man's life. There are some questions that we have to really consider and ask. And oh my goodness, our guest was able to make it. So we are going to take a brief break and we will be back on the Straight No Chaser Show on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio station. Back on the Straight No Chaser Show on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio station. My guest was able to make it. Thank goodness. This is the phenomenal Kim Foxx. How are you?
I am well. Forgive me for my tardiness. It is
the traffic
out there.
Is
yes, the rain.
The Chicago rain traffic. Well, I was starting with I was about to do my Laquan McDonald rant.
Oh.
But we're going to save that until the end of the show. I want you to tell the Straight No Chaser audience who you are as a person, as a woman.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have seen your name, but I don't know if they necessarily know who you are. Were you born and raised in Chicago?
I was. So let me first say I'm Janelle's daughter and Myrtle's granddaughter. And that's really important to me because, the last couple of weeks, people have been trying to define me by, where I worked as opposed by who raised me. So I start with I'm Janelle's daughter. And Janelle was a 18-year-old single mother when she had me. And she had my brother a year before. So she had 2 kids. By the time she was 18, my dad had gone off to college and my mother was forced to raise my brother and I with my grandmother's help. So, we grew up in Cabrini. We grew up in Cabrini, 624 West Division. Lived at one point on the 15th floor when my mother could do it by herself, and then with my grandmother on the 8th floor. And, my aunties lived there. My mother was one of 5 girls. And so we were always surrounded by women. So I was raised by not just my mother and my grandmother, but by this village of women. And most of them had kids too, so my cousins were always around. So we lived in Cabrini until I was about 8. We had bounced on the west side for a little bit, lived in Austin for 2nd grade, went to Byron Elementary. Then we moved back, and my mother was very much like, hey, in order for you to have the life, because she dropped out of high school when she had me. I was born in April of her senior year, and she stopped.
Wow.
So she was like, you're gonna do something. But the schools that were in Cabrini, they were encapsulated in the buildings. She's like, that's not gonna do it. She knew that the education that we were getting was not going to help propel us where we needed to go. And so she moved us into Lincoln Park, into Old Town, so that we could go to LaSalle Language Academy, which was a magnet school. And we moved in 3rd grade. And it was great. The problem was, we lived in Old Town Lincoln Park. We couldn't afford it. I mean, we was broke. So we moved around a lot, So between 3rd grade and 8th grade, I think we moved like 5 times.
But you stayed at the same school?
Same school. The goal was to stay in the boundaries of
wherever
the school.
Wherever
we have to be.
It still has to be.
It has to be in here. And so my mother was like deaf on. My brother and I had to have separate rooms. So at some apartments, she slept on the couch in the front. Some apartments, it was like an old Chris Rock skit. We have a stove but no refrigerator, no stove. So we had like hot plates, or we'd put our food like on the back porch. I mean, we struggled. I mean, we struggled. But I went to a school that had people who had affluence, who had stuff, and it made you very aware of how hard that we struggled. But my mother was real deaf on you gonna
get this education.
You're gonna do that. You're gonna do this. So I went to Lincoln Park High School. My mother at that point had started working for the city and my mother was a very spirited woman, right? Stuff jumped off a lot. she would jump off a lot. And at one point in my junior year of high school, my mother got into an altercation with somebody at work when she was working for the city and got suspended for 29 days.
Wow.
And so we were living check to check, and we did not have a check for,
Because that's actually 6 weeks.
Yeah. 29 working days.
Yes, that's because people don't understand. That's less than a month. No, that's 6 weeks.
That's 3 checks. You're living check to check. So you need at least the 2 checks to be check to check. We were no check to no check to no check. So we ended up being homeless for about 6 months in high school. And, when people ask like what defines me, I think that 6 months of not having a place to call my own, and really, it wasn't until I became a mother myself and tried to imagine what it meant for my mother to not
be able to provide for her children. My brother stayed with friends. My mother and I did, friends' houses, relatives' houses, and then we did a tour of shelters on the north side.
Until she was able to build the money back up?
Until she was able to build the money back up. She had reached her breaking point, and, she had attempted to take her own life. And that was a rallying cry for everyone around us, that even trying to build up that money over 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever was hard. And people, find it hard to believe. So this issue of homelessness really hits home because people don't believe that you can't afford a place to live. It was hard for people to conceive.
They thought she was playing.
You know what I mean?
We out here playing.
You out here playing, right?
No.
I mean, it was really hard for people to conceive because my mother was very bright. She dropped out of high school, but she was the smartest woman I'd ever met. I mean, I wanted to match her brilliance. And they could not believe. They thought it was a stunt. And it was like, we could stunt for maybe a week, maybe?
Or two.
Yeah, but it wasn't a stunt. So, she reached her breaking point at the point where I said that I had had enough because I was still working. I worked at a coffee shop up north. I was still going to school and maintaining good grades. And, my breaking point was we were at the Salvation Army and they had rules that you had to be in by a certain time.
Yes.
Because you had to have dinner together. You had to be there for like nighttime prayers. I mean, it was just, I'm 16. I don't know y'all. I got to come eat with you.
I have to be in here at a certain time.
It was
just the basics.
It was awful. So I had a teenage rant. I was like, I can't do this. And I told her I was not going to keep staying with her. And that was her break point.
Wow. And I know that as a mother myself,
yeah,
I tell my son there are things I know now that I'm looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
That because I can imagine I'd have probably stroked out in week 1.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I don't be playing this.
Yeah.
But I can imagine now as her.
Yeah.
How much pain she was feeling trying to make things better.
Oh God. I found years later she had written letters to my grandmother, describing how she felt. I mean, and it is as a mother, I couldn't imagine. Couldn't imagine.
So once we got through
that. We stayed north. So my senior year, it was like, all right, time to go to college. The funny thing is I wanted to go to college in California. Yeah.
Oh, you were going to be a valley
I was
girl.
rolling. Yeah, I was rolling. I was like, I'm out of here. You have been through some things. It's
right.
like, I'm
getting as far
I'm about
away from
to go
this as I can.
Yeah, but I didn't realize, like, you had to pay for that. I was like,
and out-of-state taxes.
It was crazy. And the interesting thing is, I went to Lincoln Park and I was in the math science honors program, but they weren't really focused on, like, the school counselors weren't really walking me through my applications. They weren't telling me what financial aid looked like. So I just knew I had the $25 for the college application, and when it comes back that you have to, like, pay for this. My mom was like, you got to talk to your dad. My dad was back in our lives at that point, and my dad was like, you got to go to community college. We can't
even pretend to
we can't
do
even
any of this.
And so I was like, community college. I mean, I think it was like, he said, you go to Daly or Harold Washington or something. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was like, that's not going to get me to. So I had pouted and was like, forget this. I had been homeless. We done moved around a bunch. And now it's time for me to pay off. And y'all have.
You were nigging.
How much do you expect a kid to go through? And then you just say, I can't help you. So for a while, I was like, I'm just not going to go. My rebellion was I was not going to go to college. And then I realized that if I didn't go to college, my mom and I would have to, like, live together as women. And that wasn't happening.
I made a little judgment error. I'm going to fix that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So SIU had a rolling admission. And so I, missed the traditional cutoff, got me a train ticket, went down to Carbondale and pled my case to get in.
God.
Yeah.
Thank God. And you got in.
I got in, majored in political science. So that was in '90. And the interesting thing, when we go back to Laquan eventually, that was the year of Rodney King.
Mm.
So I was, at SIU during Rodney King, and I remember watching that, in my dorm, and how that, you were watching on video, like you were watching it.
And I remember as well, I was a new probation officer.
Yeah.
And it was that feeling of something my friends and I talk about, being black versus being blue.
Yeah.
And it was not a good feeling.
It was, I remember being in class, right? And it's the same, so that's 25 years ago. And I remember, the justification, well, he shouldn't have been driving fast, or he shouldn't have been running from police, or he was hopped up on drugs, or, it's the exact same conversation that we're having now. But yeah, I went there, and it reinvigorated in me that I was going to be a lawyer, and that I was going to be someone who was an advocate for communities that like mine,
I need us to take a step backwards. You at that point had made that decision, but what caused the decision to be an attorney?
We were in court a lot when I was younger. Like I said, my mother and my father weren't together, and so we would have to go to child support court. And that for me, and I have to do the qualifier. I love my dad with all my heart. He is so supportive of me, and I cannot imagine what it was like for him as a 20-year-old father with 2 kids while he was trying to go to college. So I have to put that qualifier out, because people ask me all the time, you always talk about being a single mom, and we know, or you're having a single mom, and we know your dad. The reality was he wasn't there initially until I was
way
older.
Later.
Yeah, till I was much older. But we would go to court a lot, and my mother, it tore at her. There's nothing like watching your mother suffer, that you want to be Superwoman, or you want to be a hero. You want to go, every little black kid wants to buy their mama a house. You know what I mean? You want to stop her from crying. You want to have enough. And so going to court for her, it was always when I saw her at her lowest, because we had to keep going. And she told me one day, look, the judge is going to make this right. And she was explaining to people in the courtroom, this guy works for us. He's our lawyer. He's going to tell the judge what we need him to say, and the judge is going to make this right. And for me, I had to be like 6. I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the type of person
that makes it right.
That makes it right. That makes it right. And my mother, upon saying that, was like, oh, you going to be a lawyer? You want to be a lawyer? You a lawyer. And so she would introduce me to everybody as my daughter, the lawyer. My daughter's going to be a lawyer. I had to learn Spanish starting in 3rd grade. And my mother was like, ask him how to say lawyer in Spanish. Abogada. So she was like, I want you to own that. So I owned very early on that I was going to be a lawyer. And I knew I was going to do something engaged in helping people.
Now, let's jump forward again.
Yep.
I didn't want to miss that point, because people didn't know why.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people can't even tell you, that was my family business. Or whatever,
no.
And that's not your case.
No.
So now because you went to law school at SIU also.
Yeah. Yep.
So after you finished law school, did you come back immediately to Chicago?
I did. So I met my husband, like my last year of law school, and we, fell in love super quick. And we moved back to the Chicago area, and I worked for an insurance company for 9 months. And it was Cigna, when they had Cigna, they do healthcare, they had property and casualty back then. And, it was like, ooh, cool. I'm making $30,000 in 1997. This was so.
Oh, that was like, shit, I'm doing it.
I was balling with $30,000, and it was terrible. It was the most, because I had struggled. I struggled even in college. My friends and I, one of my very best friends is a doctor. She's an OB-GYN. And we would get our checks, whether it was MAP or Pell or loans, and we'd have to send money home.
Out of your college
to take care of home. Like, I was still helping, even though I was in college. And so my original thought was, and a lot of us do that. I mean, a lot of us do that. And I remember I was explaining this to somebody, and he was like, well, I don't understand. And I was like, we was poor, and you got this money, and you made sure you took care of your basics. You made sure that like the lights were still at home.
You took care of what you had to take care of for the collegiate expenses.
Correct.
And any extra,
Yep,
you divvied up between I have to eat.
Yep.
And I have to make sure that my household in Chicago, where my people stay, has a little food. And that's what it is.
It's what it is. And a lot of us go through that. And like I said, my friend who's a OB-GYN now, we laugh because we was like, man, what would it have been like to just be a college person? You know what I mean? And not have to worry about what was happening at home.
You may not have been as fantastic.
Right. You got to work for it.
You've got to not take things for granted.
It is humbling, right? It is, I tell people all the time, this whole foray into politics is very interesting because there's some people who always knew they were going to be in politics, and there's a certain kind of way that, I'm political. You know what I mean?
The way that they carry themselves.
And for me, having been, my grandmother's daughter, it was you always look people in the eye. It's always yes ma'am, no ma'am. Because we always had little, you gave what you had to the person who had less than you. You were humble. My grandmother was like, don't you ever put on airs. Like you the lawyer, but don't you put on airs.
Don't you come around here.
Don't act like you
big,
acting new.
Acting big.
You didn't do that.
That's right.
And so for me, I think that humility of coming from where I came from has always been with me. And that when you grow up that poor, you really don't ever want to be poor again.
Ever again.
Again. And so I remember
you don't even want to see it someday.
Man, the storm knocked our lights out a couple months ago. And I was like, who didn't pay the bill? What is that? But that is that humility that comes from having grown up like that. So I'm grateful for it. But even when I was making my big $30,000, I didn't feel like I was doing something for people like that I want to help people. I didn't feel like I was helping. And so that's when I went to the Guardian's office.
And I must say, and this is my personal bias, you have to have a certain type of, not just mind, but a certain type of heart to deal with the Guardian's office.
Yeah.
Because it's stressful.
So as a guardian, for your audience, you represent kids in the foster care system. And these are kids who have been physically, sexually, mentally abused. These are kids who come from really impoverished conditions. Maybe their mother or father is in jail. Maybe their mother or father has drug addiction issues, or maybe they have psychiatric issues. Or these are kids. They are the most vulnerable of us, right? They didn't choose these circumstances. They're in them, and now they're in the courts. And I didn't know to the full extent what that job would do for me. It was in that work that I was able to talk about the fact that I was sexually abused as a child in a way that I never would have done
corporate.
No.
As a corporate lawyer in a corporate
Whose business is that? I even have people tell me now, like, why do you talk about that? And it's because I would see these kids and they would be like, oh, Miss Kim, you're a lawyer. You must have had, this. Your dad must have been a lawyer. And I'm like, no, my dad wasn't there. Really? Or you must have, you must have had a lot of money. No. You didn't have to go through the things that I went through. And it was through that work that I was like, oh.
That's what you think.
I went through those things. I survived those things to tell somebody else you can't too. So to that humility piece, that it was about, so me holding it and having people think that I had this, like, I'm a lawyer, I'm perfect, was not of benefit to the people I was working with. I was working with children who literally believed that because they were in foster care, because they had suffered whatever abuse that they'd suffered, that they were ruined. And if I didn't tell them about me when I had a chance, I would let them believe this false narrative that they weren't going to be able to accomplish things.
And I think there's so many people that even as adults
Yeah.
need someone to tell them, hey, I walked that walk.
Yeah. My mother used to tell, and I used to be a little embarrassed. So she worked with people who had tuberculosis. She was a communicable disease investigator, and she would go to people's houses and in the projects, wherever. And she would tell people, she was always very proud of me, but she would tell people, we used to be homeless. And I'd be like, Mama, God, you know what I mean? Like, why are you doing that? But she was so like, but we're not anymore. Or my mother was a victim of domestic violence. She used to say, I used to, get beat. And these women who were going through it needed to see her on the other side of it. The shame of it. For me, what I realized in the guardian's office, because you dealt with kids that were so, like, it was hard, that you had to tell them, you're not the bad person.
Yes.
That people who do that, the shame is with the person who would abuse the child. You should not be ashamed. So really, like, shaking the stigma of what abuse looked like for the victim, that job more than anything, I mean, it rooted in me the ability to talk about what I had gone through in my life freely. Without shame, without regret, without exploitation, because that enables me to work super hard for you.
Now, because that's so rough, it makes my eyes water. I know, because when you work, as I told you, I'm at domestic violence court, and when you see that day in and day out, it almost kills you some days, because you hate to see people suffering. And knowing that this may not be the last time they suffer. They may have to go through this a little bit more.
Yeah.
So when you left the public guardian's office, did you go straight into the state's attorney's office?
I sure did. I went in the state's attorney's office, and I stayed in abuse and neglect, child abuse and neglect. Because in the guardian's office, I was the kid's lawyer the whole time through. The state's attorneys would rotate in and out, right? So they'd be there for 4 months, and then they'd leave. And then somebody come in, and you had to, like, okay, this is what happened on Kim's case. You have to walk them through it again. And it was so disjointed. And they were making decisions about whether a kid went home, whether parental rights was terminated, whether...
And coming in the middle.
In the middle. I mean, it wasn't effective. So they created this program where I had to commit to them that I would stay in abuse and neglect for a couple years, and I would train other attorneys on what it was like to do these types of cases. Nobody liked doing those cases. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It is. For people who are like, I want to be a state attorney, I want to be a prosecutor, I want to bad guys, to do child protection. To make the call of, has this mother really rehabbed, enough from her drug addiction to being trusted to care for a baby?
And having
who wants to make those calls?
And having to pray every night that every
was
decision
the right call.
you made was the right one.
Nobody wanted that. I mean, there's people think, and I think that's part of why we have the struggles we have in our criminal justice system now, is that things are black and white, right? It's so much gray.
Yes.
It's so much gray. The gradient, sometimes it's like black and then it fades into a gray. You know what I mean? These are human endeavors. You're talking about human beings. And if you don't see the individual person, if you see the offense and nothing else, we do people a disservice. And so I committed to staying there and training lawyers on how to deal with these most difficult of cases.
And you got promoted.
I did. So I left there. I did juvenile delinquency. So those are cases where the offender, if you will, is under the age of 17. So all manner of drug possession, gun cases, murder.
Because you're typically dealing with preteens and teens in that system.
But they did the same crimes as adults. I had a case, fairly early on in my career where 4 kids beat a homeless man to death, on the south side with a garbage can. But these are kids who are 14. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what is this?
And how do we get here?
How did we get here? And what happens to you
that you would do something like this to someone else at that age?
At that age. So I did all manner of that. And then I loved doing juvenile work. right? I think it was because I was so much like the kids. Like we came from the same backgrounds, and it was, again, the same kids I saw at the guardian's office would make their way to the delinquency side.
Yep, juvenile delinquency.
And on the one side, we were like, how can we protect these babies? How can we? And on the other side, it's like, oh, you done messed up now.
Right. Now
you done messed up.
To do something different.
And now you're done. And so I loved it because I saw, if we can nip them here, if you 12 years old and slanging drugs, if we don't do something with you and not just lie, if we don't intervene, if your mama don't know that you out there slanging, or maybe she does, or maybe you're doing it, if we don't intervene, we are guaranteeing ourselves to see you down the line.
If you make it.
If you make it.
If you're alive. And that's a hard, cold reality.
It's real.
Yes.
How many of these young people are dying on our streets? And so I loved it. And I was really good. I was a really good trial lawyer. And in fact, I taught on the national level. The National Association of District Attorneys has a center in South Carolina. And I was invited to teach trial advocacy there.
Wow.
After 6 years as a prosecutor. So I was good. And my supervisors were like, look, we don't have enough black people in this office in management positions. You'll never be a manager if you just hang out here in juvenile. And so I said, I'm okay with hanging out. It was good for my soul, right? Like
that was your personal passion.
I wasn't going to get rich at the state's attorney's office. You know what I'm saying? It was your public service. And they said, we don't care. We need you to be in management. We need you to help make decisions on a bigger scale than just your individual cases. So I got kicked out and had to go to felony review, sex crimes, preliminary hearings.
26 in California?
Yep.
Okay.
So I didn't stay at 26. I was one of those people who was like,
I'm good and not, somewhere else.
It just the hopelessness.
Yes.
There's nothing like seeing an elderly black man in cuffs. I came up like with this appreciation of the elder, and to see, and you wonder like, what happened?
That they're broken.
Where are you at? I liked the front end. So when I made my way through, felony review was over at 26 in California. Prelims, sex crimes, I was there, and I got promoted to supervisor, and I quickly went back. So I did jury trials at 26th Street while a supervisor in juvenile. Okay. I'm like, I can come hang out. This. I'm not gonna live here,
but I'm gonna visit.
I'm gonna visit,
and I'm gonna go back home.
And I'm gonna go back. And so I did that.
Now, after that, you became the chief of staff.
Yeah.
For Tony Preckwinkle, who is now the Cook County Board President.
Yes.
How did that transition go?
So I started as her deputy chief of staff, and that was about Tony. The president is responsible for the largest single site jail in the country. So Cook County is home to the largest single site jail. We are also the largest unified court system in the country. And we are spending $500 million every year on our jails. $500 million.
That's not including, I think we are the second or third largest probation department in the country, which also falls under Tony Preckwinkle.
And is not nearly staffed enough. You know what I'm saying? To even be as large as you are, we still have gaps in terms of the caseloads. And so we spend a lot of money on our criminal justice system. And when I came in 2013, we were at capacity at 26th Street. So we had, 10,000 people on any given day in our jails, 10,000 people. And of those 10,000 people, 86% of them were African American and Latino. 86%. And so Tony was very much like, what are we doing? This doesn't even make sense. And there was tensions among the stakeholders of like who was responsible. Is it the judge who doesn't, sets a high bail? Is it the state's attorney? Is it the public defense? Nobody could get traction.
Any understanding and cohesive way to handle what are we really doing.
Everybody agreed it's bad.
But nobody could agree on how to fix it.
So she had heard of me, had heard that, I was a prosecutor who was really rooted in, community work around restorative justice practices, around disproportionality. You know, even when I was in the state's attorney's office, I was the go-to person on, community events. It's not that many black folks in the office, and they would be like, we need you going out there. And so maintaining relationships with folks in communities. I was in Chicago Appleseed, it was an organization that dealt with criminal justice reform. So I sat on with them. And so I was really engaged as a prosecutor in the community. I worked on a board of Free Spirit Media, which taught media training to kids on the South and West sides. And so what I brought was not just I knew how to try cases, because I did, but also I was engaged with the stakeholders in a way that I could bring them to the table and say that they need to be a part of the solution. So she wanted me to help her with that.
Because people were shocked. Because people really weren't sure, where did she come from?
No, Toni didn't know me. I mean, which again is the funny part, where everybody, is like, oh, she's Toni's bride. She did not know me. I didn't work for her. I didn't donate money to her. She hired me off reputation. She hired me. I was deputy chief of staff first. And so I was deputy chief of staff for policy and planning. So my portfolio, we had a chief of staff, was I need you to look at the criminal justice system, and I need you to help us reduce the jail population and maintain public safety. And after 6 months, we, started getting traction. We started doing things, and she saw me work. And she came to me, the chief of staff was transitioning out. He was a lawyer and he was going back to private practice. And she said, I need you. And it is hard for people to believe in Cook County, that you can sit, at the highest level of executive government, having not known her. And to me, it was a testament of tapping young talent because you believe that they are talented, not because they're connected. I mean, I had no connections to her.
She wasn't going to make herself look bad.
No.
With that, let's just go on and tell the truth about it. She wasn't going to make herself look bad by bringing in a political hire that couldn't do the job.
Yeah,
that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, no, she didn't know me. I mean, and it's hard for people to believe. It was a mutual friend who worked for the administration, and I were at a party together, and I had said to her, "Listen, I really like what the president is saying around juvenile justice stuff. Her messaging is off," because she had said, "I want to blow up all the jails," and then I was like, "Hold up now,
you went too far."
I'm like, some people need to be in jail. People need to be in jail. You can't,
We have to find the middle road.
The people who will do harm to our communities, to quality of life is very important to me. When you lived in Cabrini, there was a very different quality of life for me than it was for the kids in Old Town, Lincoln Park. It was evident of where I could walk, when I could walk, who had to be with me, what time of day. I tell people we used to get in a tub on the 4th of July because you couldn't distinguish between gunshots and fireworks.
That's right.
And we used to get in the tub. People, my kids went to visit my mom. She lived in Inglewood, and on the 4th of July weekend, and they had come home the next day, and they was like, "Mama, Nana made us get in the tub," and I was like,
"We still have to do it.
We shouldn't have to do that." And people who prey on our communities need to be separated out from them. But everybody isn't
that person.
They're not. And when we can't distinguish between those who have issues and struggles, who need to get the act right, and those who need to be separated from us, what we do is, again, it's black and white. And so
we've created a disservice for everyone.
And it's not making us safer. And so that's what I brought to her was, Toni, I hear you. That's nice that you like, oh, too many jails. But you have to be able to hold the right people for the right reasons so that the quality of life for people is the same throughout the county.
Because we are going to run out of time and I don't want us to, so I want to make sure I get 2 things answered.
Yes, ma'am.
Number 1. I'm not good with being tactful.
Don't be.
So I just hit it.
You said no chase. Straight with no chase.
That's it. There has been concern that in the state's attorney's office where you worked and where you are, I'm going to just say where you're going to be the state's attorney over all of Cook County, there are prosecutors who we all have our own personal biases,
Yeah.
but who let their racial biases show by how they prosecute.
Yep.
Is there a way to eliminate or at least reduce that possibility to get more equity in the system?
I mean, I think first you got to call it out, right? I think we know for a fact that if you just let's look at drug crimes, right? Blacks, whites, Latinos, they use drugs at the same rates.
But the arrest rates.
I mean, come on. And for some folks, and you have to do the caveat, and it sounds cheesy, of most people who work in those offices go in because they want to be stewards of change for community. They want to fight for justice. They want to be advocates for victims. That's why they're there. And I would say the overwhelming majority of people who do those types of jobs do. What happens is, if everybody that's a defendant is Black and Latino, and you only deal with a certain community, and it's not your community, you start making assumptions based on just what you see. That's not the whole. Like, it was very frustrating. It was very difficult to be a Black woman at that office. It's very difficult. I have to say this for people of color in prosecutors' offices, because when I was there, when I was a supervisor, I was one of 6 Black supervisors.
Out of how many?
I think there was about 100.
Wow.
For attorneys, we had almost 900 attorneys there, and we were less than 9%. And so you go in, and your colleagues don't look like you. The defendants all look like you, and they looking at you like, hey,
can you help us, sister?
I mean, but they would be excited that maybe they would get a fair shake. And then with your colleagues, I would be in spaces with them, and they'd be like, yeah, did you hear Man say that? And you like, excuse me,
who is that?
You don't get to do that.
Right. Who is Man?
You don't get to, that. And in their minds, they weren't being intentionally disrespectful, or they just didn't, well, we talking about those people. And that's why I was like, no. Every day I'm checking the gallery, like, is who out there? Make sure I don't, because those are my people.
Yes.
And so it's very difficult. So yeah, I think that kind of implicit bias, that like unconscious bias that you believe because all you see is Black people doing certain things because you don't interact with them outside of your job, influences how you make those decisions. And if you aren't dedicated to saying from the top down, that's not acceptable here. We're going to look at the numbers. If you don't have transparency and say, hey, how come you charge these guys with this offense and you don't charge these guys? If you don't open the books to make sure that we're doing things fairly and equitably, that's how that stuff festers. And when the leadership doesn't say, I tell people all the time, in the gangs unit, they have a hall where they would have the pictures of all the people that they put away. And for people of color walking through that hall, it was like a trophy wall. That's a culture. You don't have a culture where you hang human beings' heads on walls like trophies.
How deep?
And if you don't have the leadership saying that's not how we gonna be,
that's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable, and that's how it festers. That's how
it looks acceptable.
Correct. When the line is blurry like that, because leadership doesn't tell you, we don't play that here, you're going to keep pushing. And the culture shift, there has to be a culture shift. And I think part of it is we've had one African American state's attorney, Cecil Partee, who was appointed after Daley was elected.
And that was a long time ago.
That was in 89, 90.
Right.
So then he wasn't elected. We've not elected one in a county that is largely minority.
It is majority minority. If you add Black and brown together, correct, we're almost 70%.
And we've not, and our criminal justice system, reflects that. And
more.
And we've not, and so there's not been a need to change the culture.
Ooh, okay. Because I still go to the county tomorrow. So
I'm sorry.
No, oh no.
Well, you said straight. And that's what I want. If we're not pushing the conversation about the culture, if we sit back and we say, the state's attorney's office, and we keep electing the same folks,
we don't. What you got.
We don't demand change. They'll tell us, well, there are not enough lawyers who can be a first chair at 26th Street. At 26th Street, there are no African American first chairs. And we accept the explanations that are given. We don't push it. And when we see things, like the Officer, Van Dyke case, where it's so egregious that you have to ask yourself, if you had more diversity in that room when decisions are being made, are they going to let you sit for 13 months?
400 days.
For somebody's baby?
Well, my second question, because you're telling the truth, and because we've got to get to that. My second question is, knowing what the office is like, what, besides what you've just brought, which is an extremely important point, what is it that you want to do as Cook County State's Attorney?
I want to bring radical change to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. First and foremost, I want to be an advocate for victims of crime. Right. I want quality of life is how I look at it. And quality of life doesn't mean you have to be the named victim on the complaint. What that means is, I think about what happened. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about what happened to Tyshawn Lee, where horrible. You want to get justice for Tyshawn, for his family. But the fourth grader who was in class with him, who's scared to go to school.
Yes, because there was one of the children whose father put on a fundraiser or some type of event because his child was in the class and was so traumatized.
Yeah. So PTSD. What it does to our communities when it's not just the named person. When now the quality of life. I have a 9-year-old. I have a 9-year-old. My daughter can go jump rope, do whatever. The fact that we have communities that can't do that. So for me, being an advocate for victims, it's not just the name on there, it's community. So put in the community first. Because if I'm just worried about this one kid's name and this one family, I have to think about the boy that lived next door who's scared to go outside. Or the elders who are afraid to walk to and fro. So that is central and core to the mission. And in order to do that, we have to be mindful of, let's look at our systems. Let's look at our juvenile justice system where we arrest kids in the schoolhouse for being knuckleheads and we catch them up with felony offenses and they can't get jobs. That let's look at the fact that we have to be advocating for resources and the like, so that we can deal with these issues in the proper venue, so I can spend my time and efforts and resources on battling gun crimes. Who's infiltrating our communities with these guns? Battling issues around gang violence. We are so spread thin because we spend so much time dealing with issues that are best dealt with in other arenas, like mental health, drug treatment. We great at arresting people for drugs and are terrible for prosecuting people for violent crime. Something's wrong.
And the Department of Corrections, Cook County Department of Corrections, is literally, if not the biggest, it's one of the biggest mental health facilities in the country. But it's jail.
It's jail, and it's temporary. And so we have to work with existing partners. People are like, oh, you talking about, it's easier than people think. We have Medicaid expansion with Cook County. Get people signed up. We have health centers in the community. Not enough.
But they're there.
But we have to be creative. We have to, and then allocate our resources to dealing with the violence and dealing with our youth. People diminish what it means to have worked with the youth for that long. They are the ones who are dying at alarming rates. What was it, 50 kids? This year alone, 50 children. What are we doing?
And that's not dealing with teenagers. That's dealing with babies.
Children. What are we doing? And they're, shooting folks. What are we doing? So, I have this radical idea that we could use the state's attorney's office to actually be a community partner to help with combating violence and making sure that people have a quality of life that they can, raise families in. And that's by not treating everybody by what the docket number says, looking at the individuals and saying to the community, how can you help me with this? How can we work in partnership with this? Because people don't trust the state's attorney's office. I mean, now, when you go on your rant, I'm sure people will say, why would I want to work with them? They don't treat us equally. They don't treat us fairly. If we don't address disproportionality, if we don't even acknowledge it, I will go in saying the culture has to change. And it starts, you got to see people like you.
Acknowledge all of that.
Yes.
Well, before we get off the air, we must deal with the elephant that is roaming around the streets, which is the Laquan McDonald situation. There are questions about why it took 400 days for there to be charges brought, and if it would have taken even longer had the video not been set to be released.
Yep.
I know there are certain intricacies when it goes to pressing charges and deciding charges. Can you give the audience a basic understanding of what it takes to get someone, even if it's a police officer, to the level of indictment?
Yeah. I mean, so to the first point you made, it would have taken longer than 400 days if that video wasn't going to be released. The state's attorney said as much. The state's attorney said that she had rushed at that point, rushed was the word, her decision because the video was going to be released. And so it is a legitimate question to ask. When were you going to do this? And if you could have put it together in 4 days in November, why couldn't you do it November of 2014? In a case like this, it's what I tell people. This wasn't a whodunit. You know who did it. You had the videotape. You had the dash cam video. You had the police officers, which I would like to know what the police officers wrote on their reports that night. We haven't touched on that.
The other police officers.
We haven't touched on that.
Because there were 7
yes.
other
What
or
did
8
they
other
write?
officers.
What did they say happened? But you had their reports. You had them. There were civilian witnesses. There was a truck driver. There was a young woman. You could talk to them. I saw the video footage of the woman on the news from a year ago. They were playing it last week, saying, "Look, he was walking away from them." Like you had the autopsy report. You knew what the ballistics were because you know who shot the gun. This wasn't a difficult case. Now, yes, you have to get into the mind of he was in duty. He was executing his duties as a police officer, and there are some intricacies with that. What I can tell you, it doesn't take 13 months. It doesn't take 400 days. And I want to be very clear about something because there's this explanation of, well, the feds were working with us. Murder is a state charge. It is a state charge that is not a federal charge. What the feds were looking at were civil rights violations. And I hearken back to Rodney King. What we saw with Rodney King was the LAPD or the LA state's attorneys
when they were not able to really convict
on criminal charges.
The federal system came in to deal with civil rights violations.
Correct. 2 totally different things. You did not need to wait for the feds. She didn't wait for them last week.
Oh no.
You didn't need, so that is a false notion that there was a need to wait. This case, I think on the long end, if you needed to, go through all the exercises of when you're looking at a police officer who does something while on duty, there is extra due diligence that you should take. I mean, it is difficult work, not 400 days work, not 400 days.
The other question, because a lot of people are concerned with looking at the Rekia Boyd situation, where the officer, according to the judge, was undercharged and therefore had to be given a directive for finding. Is first-degree murder the appropriate charge here?
So I know there's concern from the community about that. What happens with first-degree murder is what we have what's called lesser included offenses that are underneath them. So with Rekia Boyd, what the judge was saying was like, look, you got intent here. If you'd have charged murder, because of the intent element, that makes sense. But because you charged the reckless, there's no lesser included of reckless. It's either reckless or not. With first degree murder, you have under there a second degree, or you have under there reckless. You have these other offenses that you can fall back down under. You charge the highest and there are lower offenses underneath that you can fall down onto. If you charge the lowest offense, you can't go up. And that's what happened with Rakia Boyd.
Okay.
They charged the lowest. I can't find you guilty of that. You get nothing.
And then that's it.
If I charge you high and the judge says, you know what, you didn't prove this, but you proved enough that's second degree.
We can do that.
Correct.
Degree.
So I understand the concern, but I think charging it first, the question is, will he be found guilty of first degree murder? I think that will have to be borne out. Is it possible that he can be found guilty of something lesser based on that charge? Yes. So people can breathe a collective sigh of relief. Yes.
There's a lot of anger about that and a lot of fear because it looks, when you don't know the system well, it looks really shady.
Yeah, I think this was an effort, having seen what happened with Rakia Boyd, to be able to make sure that you have all your options on the table. With Rakia Boyd, by charging just that narrow charge, you had no options. So with first degree murder, the lesser included give flexibility. And so you can tell people he may not be found guilty of first degree murder.
But there's the possibility and the probability that he will be found guilty of something.
Correct.
And it will be there as an option.
Correct.
Now, because we are literally the brink. Oh, no, this has been fantastic. How do people get in touch with you to support the Kim Foxx campaign?
Yeah, they can go online to kimfoxx.com. I have Kim Foxx. I'm 2 X's, like Red, like Jamie. kimfoxx.com, and there are ways to donate. There are ways to volunteer. Find out what events that we have upcoming. So, I encourage people to come to the website. My biography video is there. We have news releases and our policy platforms are there, to check me out. I encourage people, I've been a lawyer 18 years and a candidate like 4 months. I encourage people to check me out and ask me tough questions. I think we find ourselves where we are because we just kind of blindly go with
whomever is up there.
Challenge me.
And with that, is there a phone number, campaign office phone number?
Oh, Lord, you asked me off the top of my head.
See now. Here we go.
Gotta look at it. Go to kimfoxx.com. And my people are going to be like, how you don't know the number by now? I'm going to look for it. I'm going to slide it to you. And then
I'll post it up when I post our interview up tomorrow.
Yeah.
And last question on that. Where is the campaign office?
So actually we have 2. So we have one, and we're trying to, it's a big county.
Yes, it is.
Big county.
Yes, it is.
So we have one at 7001 South Chicago. 7001 South Chicago. We have another one that we're opening up this week in Bronzeville at 3619 South State. 3619 South State. And then we're also trying to find a location here on the west side as well. So
for all my Austin, West Garfield, North Lawndale,
y'all want to donate some space?
Let's come on, let's get it out here.
Absolutely, we have to have a presence here on the west side because, it is noticeable that there has not been a emphasis. We talk about the south side a lot. The west side needs the resources in a way that is urgent.
The lack of, to piggyback on what you're saying, almost the fading out of the Holman Square debacle with the police lets you know just how ignored, to me at least, the west side is. Because from where I am on the south side, if that was the south, they'd still be over there.
Yeah.
Tearing it down brick by brick. But for them to have had some type of off the grid policing agency before you're charging people, and it just kind of faded away, from people's consciousness, they don't do that everywhere.
Yeah.
And I want people to understand that things that happen in certain communities, in certain areas, doesn't happen everywhere.
And it shouldn't be that way. And there's a real need, because when you ignore places for so long, when you finally do pay attention, the lack of the resources and services and the like, you got to deal with the aftermath of that. And so, yes, we are going to have a spot West, so that we can be able to have our West Siders engaged. I went to college with Alderman Irvin down at SIU. I went to grammar school at LaSalle with Alderman Scott. So, that
Somebody's gonna come up with something.
yeah. So they this is my like wink to them. Like
Right.
let's find
Somebody.
Yeah, so that we can have a presence here on the West Side.
I have to say this because it's on my mind. Years ago, I had an associate that was in the Nation of Islam, and he was like, "Oh, we're going to vote." I said, "Really?" Because typically, up to that point, a lot of the members of the nation, were on the separatist program and didn't really vote.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh yeah, Barack Obama is," and this is when he was running on, for U.S. Senate, not even presidency.
Yeah.
And so we're going to vote. This is the time I'm saying now. If you don't understand how serious the Cook County State's Attorney's Office job is for the black and brown community, that's why you're locked up like you are. And that's just what it is. If you want to not turn everybody loose on the streets, like you said, that's not the program.
We can't do that.
But if you want more fairness, more transparency, more equity in how things are being handled. For those of you who are not registered, you need to get registered.
Absolutely.
Right now.
Absolutely.
And for those of you who are registered and like to grumble, stop grumbling, get to the polls, and vote for Kim Foxx.
Yes.
And with that, I thank you so much.
Thank you
for being on the Straight No Chaser show.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for waiting for me in the rain.
No.
Thank
I
you.
said we can't get here, so I'm just talking about Laquan for a while. But I'm so glad you were able to make it because I know the rain and stuff is terrible in Chicago. But that shows your dedication to be a woman of your word.
Absolutely.
And people don't seem to get that anymore. But my mother used to say, your word is all you have.
Your word is your bond. Yeah.
And if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
So until next week, everyone be safe out there and dedicate yourselves to the truth, no matter the cost. This is Rhea Ray Harris signing off on the Straight No Chaser show.
With no chaser, Rhea gives the people a voice, empowers you with a choice. She gives you straight talk to no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. She provides a platform of growth and gives a dying people hope. She gives you straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser.